Among the most interesting games for Oregon in 2025, Indiana comes to Autzen Stadium. Is that an upset alert? Let's cross it over and find out.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for another edition of a Locked On College crossover of Locked On Ducks. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, host of that show. That's Jacob Goins, Locked On Hoosiers, host of that particular program. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, though. Your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with each of these respective teams. So,
yes,
Jacob,
sir.
Let's discuss. Because the Indiana story this past year was among the biggest in all of college football. But eventually, they went from being a great story to being shown they were just a good team. I thought they should have been in the playoff. I like that they were there. I think that is all good and fine. You go 11-1 in a power conference, please get into the college football playoff. But they have to go to Autzen Stadium, which is one of several difficult games they've got to do in the Big Ten slate.
Yeah.
What's your gauge of their ability going into 2025 on paper in February and winning a game against the Ducks?
Well, you said it. I mean, 2024 was magical. It was everything you want out of a college football season. I'm not going to say it's everything we were hoping for because we didn't know what the heck we were hoping for. It was a brand new coach, a brand new team with a program that historically has some of the most losses in the history of the sport. Let that sink in for just a second. So expectations were non-existent. It was just, hey, let's just see how it goes. And it played out the way that it did. But Indiana fans, Indiana players, and most importantly, this Indiana coaching staff led by Curt Cignetti, they're ready to move on. They don't want to talk about last year because it ended pretty poorly. Let's just be real. So the expectations are now, can you do something similar? I don't think anybody's expecting 11 wins. I don't think anybody's even expecting a college football playoff. But the schedule gets much tougher, including a trip out to Eugene that also has road trips to Iowa, Maryland, and Penn State on it. So it's going to be much tougher this season, and I've said it and will continue to say it. We're not sneaking up on anybody. This is no Cinderella story. We're going to get the best of the best, but our roster is better than it's ever been before. So I'm excited to take a trip to Eugene and play there at Autzen Stadium. Because
well, that's why I wanted to talk about it. Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about it on today's show, because Oregon's schedule in 2025 doesn't have that many high-profile games. The Penn State game is the biggest one from a national standpoint.
Sure.
Washington and Oregon State are, of course, the most important games for Oregon every single year, because you got to, for Indiana, that's Purdue. You look at the schedule, you go, yeah, you got to win that one. And, the Washington game could be its own show here on the podcast for my Locked On Ducks listeners and viewers out there, because I think Washington's an improved team. Oregon has to go on the road, but Indiana is going to Autzen here. And the team they had last year, look, Surratt is back as wide receiver 1 for Fernando Mendoza. We'll talk about later on the show. But do you feel like this Indiana team is as good as it was last year, or at least how you feel about it right now? Because at the moment for Oregon, I've been pretty consistent in saying, look, this is still going to be a good team with plenty of talent and some high-end caliber guys, but they've just lost too much for me to expect that they're at the exact same level. I still, though, would put them as a sizably better team than Indiana on paper going into this matchup.
That's fascinating that you are I'm not going to say that low on Oregon, but you are at least kind of tempering your expectations in Eugene. I think it's opposite for me. We got better at almost every single position, including the one that's most important, Spencer, the one that is offensive line, the one where we got dominated against Ohio State and Notre Dame. Our 2 losses of the year to the 2 teams that played for the national title, who just owned us up front. And we went and got 3 starters in Power 4 football that are going to be on the starting offensive line for the Hoosiers. And so does that mean that we can compete with Oregon in Eugene, whatever time this game is? I'm sure they'll find a way for it to be a night game. I don't know. Probably not, because Indiana's not to Oregon's level yet. But depending on how the season looks, right? Problem is we open up with all three of our cupcake games back to back to back. The first 3 weeks of the season are a waste for Indiana. Then we open up with Illinois at home, snore, and then you go to Iowa. Who knows what the heck that's going to be? So my concern, as crazy as it sounds, is not as much going up against Oregon head to head. It's, are we prepared going into the Oregon game? Have we been tested enough going into that matchup? Because I like the talent level and I like our head coach, but I do worry about making a cross-country trip. Last year at UCLA doesn't really count. This will be our first big-time one where we got to step into Autzen Stadium.
Yeah, Oregon will not have the lack of having proven it factor at this point because they'll be at home off a bye, but the previous game they will have played at Penn State, hardest game of the year. I'd pencil that one down as a loss for Oregon right now because Penn State's got a lot returning, Oregon's got a lot to replace, and Penn State's at home, and it's a trip all the way across the country. That's a trifecta of factors there.
That's a whiteout game waiting to happen, too.
Yes, it absolutely is. I hope it is. Because as much as I dislike the fact that we're talking about Oregon, Indiana as a conference game in the year 2025, there are some cool things. And one thing I've always pointed to as, a benefit of realignment is, boy, I tell you, an Oregon uniform combo against a Penn State wideout, that's going to be a television spectacle. Peacock's going to be drooling over that one because, boy, that could look good. But they will have played Penn State. They will have played Oregon State, Northwestern. I don't know how much of a test that'll be. Oklahoma State, I don't really know. But again, they will have been in those particular spots. And I think whatever happens in the Penn State game, I expect Oregon to be able to avoid, something you hear plenty, the emotional letdown spot because they have the bye. So whether they go to Penn State, get beaten up and lose, or whether they go there and win, if you do it, it's going to be a hard-fought ordeal. But Oregon avoided that after the Ohio State game this past season. I think the bye gives them that opportunity to just avoid any sort of, emotional setback, letdown, whatever you want to call it, following that big game against Penn State. So I think this comes down to roster, Jacob, and I know you're bullish. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks in the second segment, but Oregon's still got a lot of talent. They've got a first-round pick on the defensive line. That Hoosiers offensive line is going to be tested. I don't know which position groups Indiana will out-talent Oregon at.
It's a fair argument. And I think we just have to wait and see. I can tell you that on the defensive side of the football, Indiana brings back 2 All-Americans, right? Aiden Fisher in the linebacker core and D'Angelo Pons in the secondary, 2 of the best defensive players in all of college football. I mentioned the offensive linemen you bring in, like Pat Coogan from Notre Dame. You bring one in from Ohio State. You bring one in from Colorado. You bring in legitimate dudes here, but you still
Colorado offensive lineman. That's a dicey proposition there, friend.
Hey, it fits to the Power 4 narrative, man. We're sticking with it on Locked On Hoosiers. And you also bring in the quarterback Mendoza. We'll talk about him. A couple of starting running backs. Your 2 top receivers are back. So Indiana's more talented than they've ever been. I am by no means, before people get mad at me, trying to say that Indiana is as talented or more talented than Oregon. We're not there yet. We're just not. I will say, though, we're coming off a bye week, too, before we come out to Eugene. And if we find ways to beat Illinois and Iowa, which we have Illinois at home, Iowa on the road, which in February I'm not worried about, could be later on, Indiana could be 5-0 and have all the confidence in the world off a bye week, 2 weeks to prep for that Oregon team. You just never know what can happen.
I'd say for my Oregon fans out there, this Indiana matchup to me feels a bit like Illinois from a season ago. It's a good team. If you take them lightly, you're going to have a problem. But if you come out and play A- or A football, you'll probably end up being just fine. I think we're in agreement on that particular front. I wonder if we're in agreement about the quarterback situation in this game. Because, oh boy, most likely Dante Moore against Fernando Mendoza, who I'm sure is chomping at the bit to get back to Autzen Stadium after how it went last time. We're talking about the quarterbacks in this matchup coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was, past tense, dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress. And you get the most money back, guaranteed, all while you just go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. This is, present tense, Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Check them out at TurboTax.com. All right, Goins, let's keep talking about one of the biggest games on each of our teams' schedule here, the ye old quarterback debate. We'll expand this into the rest of the Big Ten quarterbacks.
Ye old quarterback battle. Ye old quarterbacks.
Yes.
I love it.
Indeed. Dante Moore likely to be the starter for Oregon. Former 5-star recruit, by some metrics, the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2023. He started at UCLA. It didn't go super well. Transfers to Oregon, sits, and we'll
how do you feel about him? How are you feeling about that?
Well, I'd say I am cautiously optimistic because the excitement level that Oregon fans and myself had when he was once upon a time committed to the Ducks out of high school before Kenny Dillingham left for Arizona State, if that doesn't happen, Dante Moore is never a UCLA Bruin, and he's a Duck through and through, and is still probably going into the 2025 season expecting to start after having waited his turn. But it's not as if there has been a setback physically. You know, Oregon's had that with a couple of 5-star recruits. Justin Flo comes to mind at linebacker. He got hurt. He was never able to get healthy. We never really saw what he was fully able to become as a college football player. But everything that you were excited about, Oregon fans, with Dante Moore years ago, it's still in there. It's still there.
Is it?
It's still, but yes, it is. He's still got a great arm. He's still got unique ball placement abilities in terms of how talented he is for a young guy. He can still make every throw on the field. He moves well. He's got an ability, kind of a Matt Stafford quality, to drop his arm slot when needed to.
Okay.
He throws an incredibly catchable ball. Like, that's all in there. What he was missing at UCLA was the right progression towards playing. That's what Oregon fans are hoping for. So I am cautiously optimistic. I'm definitely not. He's listed, according to our friends at FanDuel, in the top 10 Heisman odds going into next year. Or at least he has been before. I know those fluctuate up and down as the year progresses.
Well, I think Oregon's a great spot for him. I really do. I mean, I think it's a great landing spot for him.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I don't have those expectations, or even, I mean, I always have the hopes. I just don't have the expectations for him to be at that level this year. 2026, though, if he comes back, second year in the offense, if Will Stein, the offense coordinator, sticks around, then yeah, I would say he'd be a top 5-7 Heisman candidate going into the year, and should be. But there's this unknown, and that's one of the things that makes this game so interesting in 2025, is that you have plenty of known quantities, entities on both sides of the ball, but so many questions. So many. And Dante Moore is maybe the biggest question for Oregon. Is he the same guy he was that turned the ball over too much? Or is he now a completely new player? We're just going to have to wait and see. But I think that's a pretty common opinion about Dante Moore from an Oregon standpoint, is I believe he can be great, but I do really want to see it first.
And look, there are very similar, I would say, feelings in terms of Fernando Mendoza in Bloomington, because you've seen him do it at places, Cal, of course, and you've seen him beat an SEC squad on the road. I know it was a flailing Auburn team that ended up not doing a whole lot, but to take a California Golden Bears team across the country to the South and beat a team from the big, bad, mighty SEC, which, you know, hypothetically they would have won that game, but they didn't. And so you bring that quarterback to Bloomington, he's very similar to what you just had in Curtis Rourke. I don't think he's got the arm strength as Curtis Rourke, and I don't know yet about his pressure IQ in terms of his decision-making when everything just goes wrong. We're going to find out because the level of talent he's going up against in the Big Ten is astronomically different than what he just went up against with Cal. But he's similar in the fact that he does make good decisions. You don't have to ask him to do a whole lot because of what Indiana brings back on the offensive side of the football from last year, your high school recruits, and through the transfer portal. You bring in Roman Hemby, the Maryland running back. He might just be your number one. Mentioned earlier, your two top receivers, and Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt. They're back next year. And an improved offensive line. Spencer, what was he good at Cal? Roll out, dump down, move on. Get
RPOs.
4 or 5 yards.
He's good at RPOs.
RPO. That's all he needs to do. And he typically makes the right decision. And so while I think fans are excited about Mendoza, and you absolutely should be, you don't need him to be where Curtis Rourke was this past year, which I think was a Heisman candidate if he doesn't get hurt. You don't need that from Mendoza. Just be good enough, man. Everybody else around the quarterback position has gotten better, so Indiana's offense should be just as good, if not better.
There is an element to Fernando Mendoza that reminds me of this past Oregon quarterback. I think he was Tez Johnson's brother or something, Bo Nix. And Bo went from Auburn, where it was chaos, turnover, and just a total mess, to Oregon, stability, better team, great support system, and a better head coach.
Sure.
And all of a sudden he thrived. I think that's kind of what Indiana's hoping for with Mendoza, right? It's not as if Mendoza was bad this past year. I'm not entirely certain about the fit because Mendoza is kind of what was at Cal this past year, 2 years when he, started the games. He won the job in the second half of the 2023 season, which I'll get to in just a moment. He thrived in the RPO game, and I felt like Indiana's offense was all about the downfield shots, the back shoulder throws. But if they're able to run the ball better with guys like Pat Coogan at center, the transfer from Notre Dame, then hey, maybe he elevates. And it's the Cignetti system that you should definitely trademark, right as I said it out loud. You should, maybe it's the Cignetti system that should have Indiana fans excited. But for a moment, Hoosier fans, you might want to cover your ears, because I just have to throw out while we're discussing the quarterbacks in this game, Jacob. The last time Fernando Mendoza went to Autzen Stadium was a fateful day in 2023. Now, he doesn't play defense, so I won't hold him accountable for the 63 points that Oregon hung on the Golden Bears that day. But I will, however, at least hold him partially responsible for the 18 of 34 stat line, 177 yards, 5.2 yards per attempt, an interception, and a QBR of 12. So you're gonna need.
Is that considered losing football? I don't know. Well, it's definitely not winning football.
It's not winning football, Jacob. That's what I know. But one thing that should be pointed out in that regard with regards to Mendoza and his defense, the interception was thrown in the red zone, and I don't remember if he had the guy open, but he got hit as he threw, because Cal's offensive line was not particularly good. He also had a fumble in this game. Why? Cal's O-line wasn't very good.
Yeah.
This Oregon defensive line just lost a lot. Jordan Burch, Jamari Caldwell, Derek Harmon. Those are first 3 to 4 round picks. Harmon's a first. Burch is probably a second or third. Caldwell maybe a fourth or fifth. That's tough to replace. But Mateo Uiagalelei is still over there, man. And he's a first-round pick. And if you can't block him, he'll have 2 to 3 sacks in the game, and he's not the only talented guy on the defensive front, which Oregon's recruited very well over the past couple of cycles. So that, to me, defines this matchup. If that Indiana O-line can't hold up, game over. Done.
Which is crazy, because that means it may not even come down to what the quarterback does. It may just come down to what the guys in front of them allow them to do, right? And can Indiana's defensive line and linebacker core get home against an offensive line in Oregon? Historically, that's one of the best in college football. That's why Oregon puts up 1 million points in their time. I mean, that's the story. But shocker, I know, breaking news here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's going to be won and lost in the trenches in a game like this.
Whoa.
I know. Hardcore stuff over here.
I've never seen that.
That's why you tune in Locked On Hoosiers every single day.
Oh,
you get
man.
stuff like that. But
we're just not paying you enough here at the network. I mean, my goodness.
Zach, you heard that. Not paying me enough. But it really will come down to that. Can the quarterbacks be protected? Can they make the right decisions? And who screws up, who messes up. And if it's Indiana on the road, we can't afford that. Not in Eugene. No, sir.
Well, this is just one game between these teams, but what about beyond? Could they ever meet in a Big Ten championship game? Look, 2 years ago, that would have sounded what? Can you imagine saying that sentence, asking that question in the year 2019?
Yeah.
Hey, could Oregon and Indiana ever meet in a Big Ten championship game?
What's
I don't know which part of it's more shocking.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Which part's crazier? The fact
you know what? We're going to start there and see where the segment takes us.
Oh, boy.
All right, Jacob, legitimately, give me the crazier part of this sentence. In 2019, pre-COVID, it was so long ago. Could Oregon meet Indiana in a Big Ten championship game? It's sometime in the near future. Which one at that time is more surprising? Oregon to a Big Ten championship game or Indiana to a Big Ten championship game?
Oh, it's so sad, but it's so true. And my people know it. It's the fact that putting Indiana in a Big Ten championship
It probably is.
It is. I mean, again, historically, bro, historically Indiana football has been a laughingstock. It's been irrelevant. It has been terrible. But given this new landscape of college football with expansion of conferences, expansion of playoffs now apparently is a thing, and NIL transfer portal, I mean, the game has changed so much in a decade, 5 years, 3 years, and even year over year. And so, yes, while it is crazy to say that Indiana and Oregon could meet in the Big Ten championship game for all those reasons, I think there's a legitimate chance. And you start thinking a little bit bigger in terms of long-term outlooks for the Big Ten this season. And does the Big Ten championship game really matter? That question continues to come up because what happens if we get 4 automatic bids to the playoff? I don't want to play in the Big Ten championship game if it hurts my odds to get to a playoff. Heck, no. I don't want my guys to get hurt. I don't want us to be tired. I don't want any of that. So I think outlook-wise, Oregon, you guys are still at the top. You guys are still going to be doing your thing. The question mark is Indiana. Where do we sit and where do we go from here after a historic season a year ago?
Yeah, and the Big Ten championship game question in light of the playoff expansion, which I discussed last week on my show, and I'm sure you did as well. What was, or the discussion surrounding it after Oregon season came to a tough ending, shall we say, in the Rose Bowl was, man, why did we win the Big Ten championship again? What did we do that for? Was there has there ever been a time where a conference championship game meant any less? What did it gain Oregon except the opportunity to play Ohio State for their first game?
Again.
You know, and if we do away with conference championship games in favor of, well, you know, get into the top 4 for the, you know, automatic bids to the playoff, I could see that working out, but those are big money makers for the conference. They get TV viewership and you get people in the stadium because having that conference championship is still something that a lot of people hold as being very valuable, and understandably so. But here's the other side of it, Jacob, where I think they should go if they want to keep the importance of those games. If you want to incentivize teams to win a conference championship, to win big regular season games, and make that as important as possible for the fans, give them a home playoff game as the ultimate prize. That's what we saw this past year. And look, we'll get another round of data points in 2025 in the second year of the 12-team playoff where the format doesn't change. But I mean, it seems to be that the home playoff game is the best thing that you can have in the postseason.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And look, my argument was with you. It's like There's ain't no way they would get rid of conference championship games because it makes too much money. But if this whole expansion thing does come to fruition and however many teams they go, I mean, it's going to be a never ending thing. I think you'll be able to convince conference commissioners and TV providers like ESPN and things like that to where, okay, we're going to take this game away, but we're going to give you 3 more, right? 3 is greater than 1. And I think that's where you're going to have this. And whatever that number ends up being, you give up 1 to get a lot more. And I didn't see that initially, but I think that's where this is headed. And I think that's why eventually that will happen. But you're absolutely right. I mean, who the heck wants to play a neutral site playoff game if Indiana plays Florida? I mean, that'll never happen. Let's be real, Florida, right? But go and play this in Austin, Texas or something where, shout out Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators.
He's just out here catching strays for no reason on a Tuesday in February.
Yeah, we're going to send him this to make sure he saw it. But why would those 2 fan bases and teams want to go play in Dallas or in Austin or in Las Vegas when you could host it in the Swamp, host it in Bloomington, or host it on any college campus? That is what teams want. Those games were awesome. They were incredible. And that's what teams want. So you've got to give them that as the motivation, I guess, to get in, not just to get to the playoffs.
Keep the excitement, the juice, the importance of all of it. Like,
yeah.
Here's what
makes college football so special. The atmosphere, the fans, the environment, the passion. That's what makes it special.
That's what makes it different from the NFL.
You can do it here. Just saying.
And, like, NFL fans are great, but college football presentation-wise, in person and on TV, is completely different.
Yes.
They're different. And by the way, I think that's great. I think that is great because as you're listening to or watching the show right now, I am in Disney World in Orlando. Fun fact, technology is great.
It's awesome.
I go to Disneyland every single Christmas. That's where my family and I go because my brother works there. And for the last several years, my brother and I with some friends have gone to Orlando. You know why? They're different. There are differences between the two. Same base product. It's the Walt Disney Company, and it's going to amusement parks and different restaurants and all this sort of stuff. But I look at NFL and college football in the same way, Jacob, in the, hey, these two things are separate and different, and they're both great in their own way. That's fine.
Same, but different.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with you.
So keep it that way. Make them special. Have differences between the two parks. Don't make college football and NFL rules exactly the same. I don't need to see that. When I want the NFL style of content or style of playoff, I watch the NFL, and I do. I love the NFL. It's great. College football is different. And we're forgetting that a little bit at a time. But anytime you want to talk Indiana, I never will forget to remind all of you out there to tune in to Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers. We might do this again over the summer, post-spring ball. Heck, you never know. We'll certainly do it in the fall when these teams play. Jacob, my man,
no doubt.
A pleasure as always.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate everyone listening. We will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.